Welcome to the IndieRails podcast. My name is Jeremy Smith, and I'm with my co-host, Jess Brown in St. Louis, Missouri. Jess, tell everyone hello.
Hello.
If you haven't guessed, we have guests, and this is a crossover episode. We have Jeremy Smith and Jess Brown from IndieRails, and we thought it would just be fun to get together and talk all things Ruby, because that's what we do separately. So,
yeah.
Hey, guys.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, this is our first crossover, so excited to do it.
Very cool. Very cool. It's been a while since we've done one. Most of ours have been the panels at a conference or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Still hoping to make it to one of those.
Actually, my first time being on a podcast that wasn't my own.
Oh, really?
Really?
That's awesome, Jess.
Well, honored and thrilled it could be ours. Episode 40 of yours went out, which, first off, 40 is a big deal, because I think once you get past 15, you're locked in. So
we had a good guess for that 40th, so that worked out.
We talked about this a little bit on IndieRails. I'm glad to have more Ruby podcasts, more people talking about Ruby, and I think your intersection of business, especially like bootstrap business and Rails, is just a cool one. So really glad that we can do this today.
Thanks. Yeah, likewise, and same to you. We're real happy that you guys are doing what you're doing and you keep going.
How did IndieRails come to fruition?
So I just was kind of sitting around, and I've listened to a lot of other podcasts that tell starter stories of how people get started with business. And I just loved hearing how other people got their businesses started. And I learn a lot from examples. So when I can hear real life examples of how people went from A to B, it just gives me a lot of clarity and hope. And so I wanted to bring those other stories. They were maybe even outside of software altogether, but I wanted to bring those closer to like my circle of, how do I do this with Rails? Or how are other people doing this with Rails? And I wanted to know more about that. So I started thinking about the IndieRails idea. And to my surprise, that domain was open. And then, so I got that. And I just reached out to him, kind of a cold call. And I noticed that he lived in Greenville, which is pretty close to me in Atlanta. And looked like we had a lot of things in common. So we started reaching out, having conversations over Zoom. And I actually didn't have an idea for IndieRails at the time. It wasn't necessarily a podcast. It was just this ecosystem. I don't know what it is. Is it a community?
Yeah, you had said something like, maybe it's a mastermind or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Jeremy was actually the one who suggested the podcast. And it just so happened that he was interested in being a co-host. And it's probably something that I would have never just done on my own. So it worked out well that we kind of came together and made it a thing.
I've been thinking about podcasting for a while and hadn't settled on the right thing. But when Jess said IndieRails, I thought that is the thing that needs to be. So that was cool.
And both of y'all, for lack of a better phrase, do your own thing in terms of your career, right?
Yeah.
Each of you maybe want to talk a little bit about what you do during the day, what you do for a living.
So I started out solo in 2008. I had a background in finance, but I just couldn't stop programming and building things for the web. That was my passion, the things I did in my free time. And eventually I realized I could maybe make a living doing this. And so I started doing some side projects and eventually got a little bit of confidence and started just to quit my full-time job and go do this full-time. And I didn't know anything back then. What's the saying? If I knew then what I know now, I probably would have never done it. I was just naive enough to start, but I jump in, learned a lot. And I didn't start off in Rails. I was just doing regular business marketing type websites and started programming a little bit here and there, and eventually found Rails in 2011, 12.
What Rails version did you get started with?
I was right at the tail end of 2.3. And I started learning 2.3, and then 3 came out, and I had to start making that
start
transition.
over.
Yeah, basically. Always wanted to build my own product, but never had this great idea. But luckily along the way, I've met up with 2 different teams of co-founders and ended up partnering with them. And that's mostly what I do now, is just work on those 2 projects. One is called gettrack.com and the other is called csepub.com.
The first thing you said and I had trouble letting go of it was in '08, I was in finance, and all I could think about was the housing crisis in '08.
Yeah,
I was
right.
like, woo, hell of a time to be in finance.
I was in the risk management side of commodities and helping grain elevators manage their risk. So wasn't hit as hard as some other types of jobs. You would think it's not a great time to go out on your own and start your business.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, and I think this is something a lot of independent people may not think about, is that when you're small like that and you are providing a service that helps businesses become more known in a tough time, it was actually a good time to start a business because there are a lot of small businesses out there looking for websites. They're looking for an edge where they could get over their competitors, looking for a way to stand out. And that was the thing to do back then.
That's something I got to experience at Podia during COVID. A ton of people were trying to move their business online.
Yeah.
The big feature we launched during that time was webinars. I'm air quoting here because it was a way to sell a Zoom live stream or a YouTube live stream. It wasn't true webinar, like deep functionality, but it's just what people needed. Yoga studios were like, I need to sell access. And so, very fascinating. Jeremy, how about you?
I never really set out to have a typical software development career. That wasn't really on my radar. I started similar to Jess. It was doing web development was something I was doing in my spare time. It was my biggest hobby, the thing I wanted to do all the time from the time I was probably 16 or 17. And eventually just kind of fell into doing it for companies. But I've always had other projects I want to do outside of a full-time job. What if I could do this? What if I could work a 4-day work week? What if I could work from home? What if I could renovate our house? What if I could go to urban farm school for 7 months? All these different random things that I'm doing. And the best way I can do that is to work on my own. It gives me the most flexibility and the most control. It's scarier, but it gives me like this ability to try a bunch of stuff with my life that I want to do. That's kind of my bigger goal, is just to try interesting things with my life that I don't see other people doing necessarily. Or if they're doing it, they're having to do it in just evening hours or something like that. And I'm doing that too as well. But I finally have a greater amount of control just by being able to work on my own. Once I was able to kind of get over the fear, learn enough skills to be able to sell my own services. And so I've been doing that for, I think, 11 years. So yeah, I love it.
You've got something you're cooking on right now.
Liminal? Yeah, Liminal. That's my fresh take on old school forums. I've been just hearing so many things happening in the past couple years related to either chat exhaustion or specifically Slack, people using Slack for communities rather than just professional enterprise teams, that kind of thing. It's cost prohibitive, but then now they're killing all of your message history and stuff like that. And that makes me so mad. Makes me so mad that all these communities are having their common history, all the knowledge that has been gained from all these past discussions just chopped off because that's the default de facto tool. So I'm doing something that's like if Slack and GitHub issues had a baby, that's what I'm aiming Liminal to be like.
I love that. I also love how you're doing the weekly updates where you just sit and talk to the camera. I just think that's cool.
Yeah, that's great.
I've never done anything quote unquote build in public before. This is my first time, but it's really because the last time I built something and it failed because once again, I hadn't talked about what I was doing. I just built in private and then like released and made one tweet and there was no response. And I was just, I'm not doing this again. I've done this too many times in my career. Like I'm not going to do this again. I'm going to talk. I'm going to build stuff and talk and keep doing both of those things. And honestly, it was a person that drove it home for me best was Mike Buckby. We had him on IndieRails last summer, I think. He was talking about doing 50% marketing, 50% development, that he would get marketing stuff done in the morning and then his treat was going to do dev work. And it may be that the ratio is a little bit different than that, but it like really pounded home for me, like marketing, talking about where you're building is as essential as what you're building. And I finally feel like I've hopefully learned that lesson. Hopefully I'm not going to make that mistake again.
And I think for you too,
artist
Jeremy, it's great for you to talk about those things out loud and to like organize your thoughts and to collect them. And it's sort of helping you with next steps and figure things out. And
Totally. People are DMing me, emailing me, either just encouragement or like, hey, have you thought about this? Or here's another reason why you should be building this, or here's a feature idea. So that's been really cool. I've never had that because I've always been building on my own and thinking if I can go away and create the perfect thing, polish it all up and then bring it out, everyone will accept how great it is, right?
Right.
The problem is I'm very limited as one person. I may have a little bit of taste and a little bit of ability, but I'm still finite. I can't see all the things. Being able to build within a larger community context gives me so much more. And already like so many benefits from just talking. Yeah.
I would like to hopefully encourage you with what I'm about to say, which is when I read your initial kind of tweet announcement about it, or excuse me, X post, it was the type of marketing that people talk about that I think as developers we strive to get to, which is you're just talking about the fatigue of having so many different tools and stuff.
Yeah.
I actually just felt it in my gut a little bit when I read it. Damn. And so kudos, because that's what so many people talk about in marketing, right? Is you hear solve the pain points. I really felt it physically. I was like, that's good. That's good.
Cool. Thanks.
I wish I could write like that. So
I wasn't sure if I could write a put your flag in the sand like declaration, and very personal too. Like I didn't know if that was going to resonate. It turned out it did. And that was really nice, but it made me feel nervous writing that. If people didn't get it, you know, like you sometimes tell a story that is deeply meaningful to you. Yeah. And other people are like, what is he talking about? That feels so bad when that happens. But taking a risk like that and then having it turn out, okay, people got it. Okay. That it's like equal parts relief and then excitement. Okay. I'm not the only one that feels this. And maybe I could solve this. Maybe I could actually solve this.
I can't fathom. People talk about it for years. That's got to be a gold mine. Having people come to you in your DMs, telling you their own frustrations and ideas.
Yeah.
Like that's how you want to build a product is based on people's frustrations with the other stuff. That's great.
Yeah. I should say like one thing that I also know is that many of the people that I'm connected to that see my stuff, they're all developers as well. And so there's a professional interest in what they're talking about. On one hand, I love that. On the other hand, I know that they may not be my paying customers, or they're very likely not. While it's really encouraging and I love it, I can't count on that signal too much for who actual customers might be. So I'm still trying to figure out how do I find those people. I think some of the people that I interact with on Twitter could be potential customers, but there's got to be a broader set outside of that. Aren't developers, aren't building their own products.
You build that reach though, right? That developer might not be your customer, but his friend might be.
Who do you envision your potential customer being at this stage?
Okay, so the people I'm most interested in going after are the people that start small communities, maybe 50 people, maybe 500 people, in that range, around a niche topic, and need something at a reasonable price point and not price per seat. Slack is like, I don't know, $875 per person per month. It's just crazy expensive. The Ruby and Rails modularity Slack, for instance, they are just talking about kind of the big monoliths getting modularized, how to do that. Shopify and Gusto and folks like that. So it's all discussions around modularization of Rails monoliths. They recently decided to move to Discourse because they were about to lose their Slack history. So they're now going through and trying to do an export to Discourse by going back through all their past threads, deciding which ones to import, trying to map them to the new users, asking all the users, do you want to be connected to your posts in the new system, or would you prefer to be like anonymous with your posts? So much manual work just to get off Slack. That makes me so mad. It's just ridiculous that that would have to be the case. And I'm really glad the Discourse is there. I think there's an opportunity for another contender, another option. And one of the things that I think I really like about Slack and Discord is that you can have all of these spaces, all these workspaces in one app, in one system. And so I think that is one of the things I'm going after, is the ability to bank on the fact that if you've got one space, it's much easier to add another, and you only have one site to come to. So I'm thinking, well, Jess and I, we ought to have an IndieRails forum. We actually have a Slack where it's just the two of us. And we thought about like adding other people in who want to talk about IndieRails stuff. But I'd rather it be a forum where we can always get to our history and where it can actually be potentially like public rather than private only. You can't get to it unless you're logged in or something. That would be one. In 2 weeks from now, I'm doing a backpacking trip for Rubius called Ruby on Trails. And I've got a separate Slack instance set up just for the 12 of us or whatever, discussing what gear to bring and logistics and stuff like that. I just want a little forum for people that do this. If I keep doing this every year, then the number of people that come and do Ruby on Trails kind of grows, and maybe we can share pictures and stuff like that. I just want a space to do that. And I don't want to use Slack because I'm going to lose all the messages, lose all the pictures, whatever it is that I want to see. So that's kind of like that range of, you might have a book club, you might have some kind of small community group, things like that, where you're willing to pay something, but it can't be almost $9 a person a month, you know?
For 1,000 people.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
It's insane.
And I was thinking while you're saying that, losing the history, I assume when you're talking forum, like you're kind of encouraging a little bit more like long posting, like almost kind of like a discourse. Because that's one thing is whenever a conference invites me to a chat, a part of me dies inside.
Yeah.
Or like anytime anyone invites me to Slack, I go and just like sacrifice an animal outside, like so I can have the bandwidth mentally to join another Slack. But I don't read chat history. Ruby on Rails, I think they have a discourse set up, the actual framework itself, and how valuable it is to go back and read through those threads because it encourages most of the time a little bit more long form, a little bit more thought. Where like in chat, I'm just, here's one word of my sentence, here's half of the other sentence. It's impossible to go back and read.
Yeah. I never go back beyond today, maybe yesterday in Slack history.
I have a really hard time not getting rid of all of the unread bubbles. I've got to go to all the channels and just at least scroll back through and see what I missed. But it means my task completion is just going crazy, trying to like do all of that. And that's insane. But yeah, to your point, like for my money, there's so much gold in past forums where people did long posts explaining how to do something, or long form discussions where people really brought out all the fine details of a thing. And for me, like GitHub Issues is one of the best places for reading long form stuff and also for writing as well. It's where I do a lot of writing for client work, but also where I'm reading a lot of stuff that's very deeply technical, but it's this long form stuff. I just want that, but I want the ability for non-developers to have that and be able to like have a Slack interface for that.
Until now, observability was metrics, logs, and traces. It was reliability budgets, error rates, and latencies. It was big acronyms on a central dashboard. In short, it was what the ops team cared about, not the developers. But Honeybadger is changing that. Of course, you need the big picture, the single pane of glass that lets you know what your system is doing and that it's operating normally. But individual users matter too. User experience is more than just a line on a dashboard. Honeybadger's observability platform lets you drill down into the details, into the individual user experiences that drive product development and your business forward. It helps you understand your product and your users as much as it does your systems and performance. Honeybadger's free developer plan includes error tracking, uptime monitoring, custom charts and dashboards, and 50 megabytes per day of structured event logging. To get started, visit honeybadger.io. That's www.honeybadger.io.
I have a feature request.
Okay.
Speaking of this, you know those forum threads? Hey, I have this problem, and there's a big long discussion, and then the last post is, thanks, solved it, and that was it.
Yeah.
All the emoji codes.
Build something that detects that and says, what was the solution? And don't let them post until they actually post the answer.
Don't let them post. That's funny. I like that.
Because, man, how many times have we run into that where you're like, this is exactly my same issue, and then there's no solution? It's funny, though, because you totally could build in a little thing to kind of detect that or whatever. And even if it's something as simple as having the like mark as answer in GitHub discussions or Stack Overflow, or like little tiny hint at encouraging people to do the right thing. That's where a ton of value can come from in a forum like that. I'm excited for it because we have the same problem with Discord. There's so many people in our Discord, and then all of that's not searchable. It gets lost. The same conversations happen all the time when you could funnel people into, we've already talked about this 1,000 times. Here's a pinned thread. Go there.
Back in the day, that's what you had. In the forums, it'd be like, before you post, read this because we've answered these. And you have this question, go to this thread. You have this question, go to this thread. This is ancient. The ancient wisdom of forums. Yeah.
AI, you could just pull in a little question box and just
you
probably answer.
The ability to do summarization or discoverability definitely goes up with LLM tools.
The biggest wishes of luck to you and excitement, because I think it's cool. Kudos to you for putting yourself out there. I know that I'm going to assume that's maybe not the easiest thing for you to do is like, let me sit down, look at a camera. So
it's taken a while, but it's been a goal of mine for a few years. And I've been baby stepping my way into it. And I wish I could tell myself that in the past. You can do this. You just baby step it. You speak at that first little conference, or you get up in front of people, or you do a podcast. The more you do it, the more comfortable you get. The first time I was on a podcast 3 years ago, I was nervous all morning for hours leading up to it. I couldn't even work. It was a panel discussion. So several people asking me questions. It was an hour or so. And when I was done, I was wiped for the day. I was good for nothing. Like I probably had to lay down or something. It was just, I was done. It's like so much nerves. And now it's just normal. It's just, this is what we do. We do this every 2 weeks and it's not a big deal. It's okay. And realizing I can baby step that. And then also realizing that there are so many people that I've made friends with that my real friends, they'll appreciate what I'm trying to do. Even if I fail, they're not going to make fun of me. And there are a few people that will, but that's okay. The people that I really care about are my friends.
I really enjoy your videos on X. Maybe it's because I'm a developer, but I really enjoy you could just ship the product, but it would gloss over every one of those decisions you had to make along the way. Why did I want to do it this way versus that way? And I find those the most interesting. So I really enjoy those a lot because of that, where it's just, this is why it works that way. I think that's a big thing that if you watch how 37 Signals launches anything, they are intentionally doing a lot of that too, describing like, why does Hey work really weird compared to every other email service? That's why your thing exists. At the end of the day, this is the problems you're solving, how we're thinking about solving the problems. And I think that hopefully will go into a lot of the marketing that helps people like realize, oh, this is anti-chat and that's a good thing for these reasons and it provides these benefits. And you also get to talk about the anti-features. We don't want those unread bubbles. Don't want those distractions.
Or the
like
active
we're choosing
indicators.
not to have that.
Yeah.
And I just enjoy that a ton, seeing like the decisions that go along the way. And maybe I'm a developer and that's more appealing to me or whatever. It makes picking out products to try and then dig into a lot easier. They're not just saying that, oh, we're better. And that's all I can tell until I spend a week trying the product and then find out, no, it's not better. It's just weird and different or whatever. I like that a lot. And you reminded me earlier of, I think Rob Walling has a PDF book called Start Marketing the Day You Start Coding or something like that.
There you go.
Which you don't need to read the book. The title says everything right there.
Chris just read the whole book to you.
Yeah, the first
book.
page is C title.
Yeah, right.
I think that's really important too, just as someone who is also more comfortable writing the code. The marketing part is maybe more important than the code because you can make that product work in PHP or anything else. It doesn't really matter what you build it in, but at the end of the day, it also doesn't matter if you build it if you can't get people to use it.
Yep.
So I think it's important, really important to spend much more time on that, especially when that's not the thing you're comfortable at. It becomes more easy the more you do it. So
I was going to echo, you were talking about Mike and his 50% marketing. I think he also said on that something like, I've never had a product fail because I couldn't get the product to work. It's always because I couldn't get the marketing to work.
Yeah. I really have to internalize this. If I want to build stuff that people actually use, I must internalize this lesson.
Your launch date is aiming for November 1st?
MVP for November 1st. I think I'm on track for that. Although I'm also overly optimistic sometimes, what I think I can accomplish. But I think I'm in good shape. There's a point where I think I probably need to stop adding new features and just go into polish mode. Even though it's an MVP, what I know to be true is that you only get one chance at a first experience of the product. And so if I open the doors and invite some friends in, I want it to feel good and at least a certain level of good. And it's less about performance than UI experience. It can be slow, but it needs to look and feel good, decently good, especially the happy path, the main areas of the app. There might be some settings pages that I can leave out, but I need to nail the quality level that I'm after. And so I probably need to spend most of October on that, I think.
I don't think MVP means ship shit.
Yeah.
I think it means ship less features, but do them better or do them well enough. People call it like minimal lovable product or something like that.
Yeah.
I agree with that. The problem I have is that how do you spend a month doing this? I'm like, yeah, I would need to spend a month doing that, but actually I'd spend 6 months, right? So there is a balance.
Yeah.
Fired me up.
So one thing I would love to talk to both of you about, and I think is a larger discussion that we need in our community, is how well Rails is delivering on the one-person framework ideal. I love that concept, the one-person framework. It's such a succinct way of saying what a lot of us want to be able to do and what we hope the community can provide. I'd love to talk about how we feel like Rails is doing on that, what's good, what could be better, and then ways that both the framework and the community could improve that for solo devs. And it's not just people always on their own, but toward that end of things. There's a lot of content and stuff available for like getting to Shopify size, the scaling, that kind of stuff. But for people that are entering, for people that are bootstrapping, how are we doing there?
I got lots of thoughts. I'll save space though, because I know Chris has lots of thoughts. Chris and I were literally together this weekend in St. Louis.
Yeah.
Oh, we saw the picture.
That picture.
I was going to accuse you of using AI to doctor that.
Yeah, that photo.
That's why I pulled the phone out.
That's why we look so good.
Yeah,
I had to put a shirt on for the picture. It was a whole thing. That's what Chris and I do. We just hang out shirtless in his living room.
I love it.
On our phones, texting each other while our wives talk.
That's funny.
I am excited by the idea of the one-person framework. I think it's a good branding for Rails. I think GHH started using that at Rails World last year.
Yep.
He had like a blog post about it in the past. I really like that.
Yeah, and it was so overlapped and resonated with the IndieRails concept. So it was really exciting for us.
Yeah, it's perfect. I struggle to find something that clicks with me more than Rails. And that's an equal part Ruby and an equal part Rails, because LayerCon happened this past week and I look at them from framework perspective and they just kill it when it comes to empowering people to build web apps. They have so many first-party tools and packages and paid things that really allow someone to build an app from nothing. And so I'm jealous of that ecosystem in that regard.
Yeah.
Because I think they just have so many more options available to us. Chris is filling those gaps. Noticed is a thing that Chris built to be able to like send notifications across multiple different platforms. That's built into Laravel. We started hacking on Pay together because we wanted Laravel Cashier. My first attempt at it back in the day was called Bank Teller. I archived that repo on GitHub. It's a verbatim copy, Ruby copy
nice
of Cashier that I wrote by myself in a hotel room at RailsConf 2016.
Yeah, that's funny.
I think we have ways we could improve, but I don't know that we'll ever get there. I don't think the goals of Laravel are the goals of Rails in terms of just comparing like Taylor Otwell, like DHH, because like DHH, he's got Basecamp.
Yeah.
He's got, hey, like Rails is his love letter, his gift he gives.
Right.
And Taylor, they just raised $54 million in funding.
Yeah, I saw that.
To continue, like that's his full-time job. So there's a difference there.
If you look at Laravel core and their focus versus Rails core is the framework itself. And Laravel happens to be the framework, but also like the abstraction layers on top for payments and notifications and auth, inertia.js, which is kind of their hotwire approach-esque. And I think that's where like the Rails team draws the line, is like we focus on the framework, but then to get to the real one-person framework, you need the abstractions on top. How do you do payments? And what if you just don't have to worry about the payments architecture underneath and webhooks? And what if webhooks come in out of order? And those are the little nuances that you have to provide in a library of some sort so that the developers don't ever have to think about it. And that's where we need to go, I think, in Rails, as if the Rails core team can't or isn't going to do that stuff, we can fill that in. I've been trying slowly, but there's so many things to do, like OAuth, for example. Rails core will do the authentication generator, but it looks like they're not going to even have a registration controller at all, because that's pretty unique depending on the application. So someone needs to provide that. And we've had Devise for a long time, but now it'll be something built on top of the authentication generator and whatnot. But that's the way I see it. The Laravel team is willing to do like a lot more abstractions and things, and that's cool, but they're going to have to raise money to do that and have 34 employees now and a big payroll and whatever else. And they're now trying to compete with Vercel and Heroku and whatever else themselves with that money in order to like fund all that. So it's going to end up a wildly different framework because of that. But it also is great for us because it gives us opportunities to go build things and fill in the gaps. It's harder because you don't have them marketing your stuff for you. You got to still do all that work or whatever, but we can do that ourselves. And I think that's fine. It's just going to be like supporting each other in what we're doing and making sure that we help each other and recommend each other's stuff and whatever. But
I look at Laravel with jealousy, but it's not a critique necessarily on Rails. DHH has always been very upfront about what Rails is to him. I have the most amount of respect in the world for Raphael and how he's there day in and day out, just in the framework. So like, I want to be very clear. My longings to have something like Laravel isn't a shot at Rails. It's the trade-off I choose because, again, I just love Ruby and I love how slow it is according to Twitter, and that's fine with me. I'm good with it. But back to the original question, I think Rails does deliver on the promise. This whole solid movement, I switched to solid cache. I switched to solid queue. I don't run Redis at all in Jobboardly. Kamal was a little bumpy for me, but I don't have a big Docker background. And the reason Kamal was bumpy for me is because I was an idiot. And I tried to use it on AWS EC2. And I tried to use it with the Amazon flavor of Linux. Like, I'm just an idiot. Now that I have it running on Hetzner, it works. I think the move to dev containers in Rails 8, it's optional, but that's going to enable people to get started even easier with Rails. And so I think it's all trending in the right direction. I wish Trix got some love. I wish active storage has gotten better. It's getting better. It was a big missing piece, though, in Rails for a long time.
It's funny the things that are libraries in the framework and the ones that aren't. Because I would not have picked Trix to be or
like action text.
Action text. That would not have been like one of the ones I would have said ought to be there.
The inbound email.
Yeah, even that was a funny one. Yeah. There are some parts that are only very specific use cases that are official, like Active Record. Yeah, get it. Yes, Active Record.
I've heard
like
of that.
Yeah, action support. Like
solid record.
Solid record. Yeah. Those parts make a lot of sense, but then it's funny, some of the one-offs that feel like, where did this come from? Okay, it came from 37 Signals, their particular needs. There are some things that are not official that seem like they ought to be official, and then there are some that are official that I'm surprised are.
I think as someone who's just done too much open source stuff to the point where I've maintained things that I don't use, I really understand and appreciate what they're doing, where it's like, we built this for our day job, so we might as well share it.
Sure, right.
Because we can maintain that, because that's not something that is totally out of our wheelhouse.
Yeah.
If you don't, I wish more people used Action Mailbox for the forums. Being able to reply via email means I don't have to go log in. I can do it from my phone, all kinds of different things to reply to something. That's killer to have built in, but also, it's not core like Active Record. But yet, I also appreciate that because they're running a lean team, a small team, that they probably do not want to do the higher level abstractions and maintain that stuff. And it's cool. And it looks like Laravel. If you look at Laravel too, they've got 3 competing authentication things and multiple template things that they support themselves, like Inertia and Blade and Livewire and yada yada. And it just seems like it's all
forward.
Yeah. It seems like they're going to end up in that position in the long run. If we built too many alternative things, we don't even use half of them, and we're maintaining them, and we're getting bogged down. And now we got to raise $57 million to grow the team and continue maintaining this stuff and build products.
Yeah. The surface area just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah. And I don't think they've realized that yet, but the Rails team is fine-tuned. They each have their own responsibilities and trust over who does what and whatever. And I think they're like a well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
They aren't intentionally trying to grow that, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
It does mean sometimes that, Trix doesn't get the love that it needs because Basecamp doesn't necessarily need more features or whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
If you want tables and highlighting and other stuff, you either have to wait until they need it, or we have to build our own extensions. And that does make it harder because some random guy built this. He might not have the time to maintain that for the long term. So you might start using somebody's library. And I think that's where the real bottleneck lies in the growth of Rails. There's so many libraries that I don't use anymore and just write it from scratch now, because I can maintain API clients from scratch much easier than using gems that sometimes get out of date, and then I got to fork it and fix it myself and maintain someone else's code. Totally different interfaces. That's where it starts to break up a little bit to the point where it's tough.
You just hit on something that describes very well why I like that there's so many first-party packages in Laravel, is that I'm real gem shy these days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've done enough upgrades where some gem I use hasn't been updated in 3 years. And now I can't update to like Rails, 7.2 because of some hard dependency or something. And
Big decimal not new.
Right. Oh gosh. Yeah. And so there are people I obviously trust, and I get it for free.
Andrew Kane.
Oh my God. Andrew Kane. He could be like, I wrote a gem that you feed all your personal information to, and I'd be like, yeah, perfect. Here's my social. I trust Andrew Kane with my life. There's options. There's people who build trust, and the people who build stuff I use don't owe me anything. If they don't want to update it, that's fine. I'm not mad at them. It doesn't mean it doesn't cause friction for me, though. I don't know what version Laravel's on right now, but let's say they come out version 951. I'm using their first-party packages. I can probably safely assume that those have been upgraded to work with version 951.
I think what we're saying in many ways is that what's hard is knowing the boundaries between official and unofficial libraries and where those boundary lines are going to be drawn. And sometimes the surprises about like a new library coming out oh, where'd that come from? I didn't realize we were going to get that. I didn't know that was now going to be included, but that everyone else has to sort of adjust. And this is not a criticism of the framework. I totally agree. Like, no one should be forced to support things that they're not maintaining or continue to support things that they don't want to support anymore. But figuring out that edge of where to build things and when to reach for some other gems, which ones, if it's not official, is there an unofficial that everyone uses that I need to know about? So you're always going to Ruby Toolbox to check which gems the most popular one or all of that. But I think that is an area of difficulty, especially for new people coming in saying like, well, what do I use? I get this out of the box, but then what for all the other things that I need? And there is an easier story for that, I think, with Laravel, like what we're saying, because there's larger surface area in terms of the first party packages. And I don't think we should have that, but we need some kind of answer that makes it easier for people coming in to say, okay, there isn't a first party, but here's the one to use. And here's, you know, like,
my takeaway is that we all need to get the most expensive Go Rails subscription and then fund Chris, Kent, and Colin to just build all the packages that we want.
Yeah.
Maintain them forever. So
we'll raise 57 million.
That is a possibility, right? That you have the Go Rails team builds sort of the missing pieces that solo devs might use. They're not going to be the tools maybe that really big shops that have already built something in-house are going to use. It's a business that maintains that. And that sort of sits off to the side of the open source. There's other ways to solve this other than sort of begging DHH to like build more stuff. We don't need to do that. Right. How do you resolve the tension in a different way?
I just don't think that's fair to DHH or the Rails core team or anything. Like, I've joked for years about how I want authentication. I'll push for it. Don't get me wrong. It's going on my tombstone.
You succeeded.
But if it all pans out, I will take credit for it. It's just not fair because he's been very clear. And the Rails support team is very clear where their boundaries are. And I respect those boundaries.
Yeah. For us, if we use all those libraries every day and we're not going away and Noticed and Pay and whatever else are used in every single thing we do, then you can be sure that, we're going to keep maintaining it. We're going to keep testing against the latest Stripe features and whatever else. The hard part, like I was saying earlier, is, well, in Pay, we've merged Paddle and Lemon Squeezy. Lemon Squeezy will be more of a first party thing now that Stripe owns it. But it's really, really hard that those payment processors do not work even remotely like each other.
Yeah.
And so our maintenance for that stuff is to the point where I'm probably going to drop Braintree support pretty soon. We have Paddle Classic, but they rewrote their entire API and product into a new version because their old one was so bad. And new one's still like got its similar weird limitations. And same with Lemon Squeezy. And since we don't use them, how in the hell do I maintain this stuff? The hardest part too is we can get a pull request for some of these new things that seems good. It seems complete, but you can get into the weeds and actually integrate it. Then you're like, I don't think you did before you sent this pull request because there's missing pieces all over. And then I have to spend even more time. If I had written it from scratch, I would have addressed those as I went because I knew about them ahead of time.
Yeah.
And this is why I respect the Rails core team and Raphael especially so much, keeping all those things in his head for these pull requests and being able to articulate, yes, this is a boundary that we don't want to cross for core and whatever. It's amazing. And I've been trying to like do more of that. That's why Pay is ridiculous to maintain and keep up with and stuff. But our Stripe stuff, easy. I do it every day. We use it for all of our own products. So when something's wrong, I know that code really well, and it doesn't have the limitations that the other payment processors do. So it's easier to work with anyways. But man,
it has different limitations.
Yeah. Well, yes. A lot less like simple things of like Paddle. For all of our products, we have multiple accounts, but literally cannot use Paddle or Lemon Squeezy with those because they only expect you to have a customer with one email address and no duplicates, which means you cannot separate billing between those accounts, which is just insane. And it's such a simple little decision that they thought they were going to be smart. email addresses are unique. We should do that in our database. I always thought that was a strange decision by Stripe to allow you to have duplicate customers with the same email.
Mm-hmm.
It's for that reason. In order then for us to build products that have payments in multiple accounts. So for example, in Liminal, you have one person that owns several spaces and you want separate billing for each of those. Probably want to go with Stripe because it's such a pain to manage that otherwise, because you have to have a special email address for each account to have billing separate, which is one of the requirements we pretty much have in Jumpstart. Is if you're using Lemon Squeezy or Paddle, every account has to have a special unique billing email address, which just sucks, but it's part of the service. And they don't have a great way of putting metadata on the customer or whatever, or the payment or something to separate them out. So we can't even really do anything else. So those are the decisions that, like I was going to ask you about Liminal, as you build this, when you find those points of frustration, why is this taking so long to build and design or like implement? I'm curious to hear as you go. You may not have off the top of your head moments like that, but what are those moments? This is why it's still not the ideal one person framework, because it's still too hard to add payments or whatever into it. If you want to find those things that we need to make the framework better, those are the moments that are like really painful in the moment. And you're like too focused on trying to solve it and really taking a step back. We should try and solve this for everybody. Here's what we need for our solution. Will that work for everybody else? Could we make that a library? Could we extract that? If people find those moments, that's how we could go crazy fast, I think, as a community eventually, once we pull those things out. Someone literally was emailing me. I made a video adding very terrible referrals into an application. They were asking me about the video over email, some question about it. And I was, well, why don't I just make it a library? And by simply doing that, you also make it generic and you have configuration options. Instead of just hacking it onto the user model, you're like, let's just have a referral model and these other concepts that start to be teased out. And then it's generic and usable in every app. And then I can go back to that person, just use this gem. I'll take care of everything for you. Just follow the README and stuff and whatever. And then that makes it so that, yes, we solved his problem, but we also hopefully solved it for everybody else going forward or whatever. And you may have to do some extra work ahead of time or upfront, but hopefully you can solve the problem in the long run.
I don't know if other frameworks are like this because I don't know a lot about other frameworks, but I'll say that's one thing that I found extremely easy and straightforward is I just started working on a gem. It's my first time building a gem. And Greg Molnar and I are working on a virus scanning service. And we want to create a gem that will help the users send that file to the service. And within just a few hours, I was able to bundle a knit, get a gem up and going, and package it into a sample Rails app and start using it. And I found that so easy. It paves the way for building these types of libraries.
As you probably know, more or less building a regular old Rails feature, they've made it so easy to extract the Rails engine.
Models, modules, it's pretty much all the same.
Yeah, there may be a couple things like if you need to inject a module into Active Record, you don't have to do the extra hoop of callbacks like initialization stuff in your main Rails app. But when you make it a library, it's one extra little thing. You can learn that pretty easy. And then the rest of it's like writing regular old Rails code. It's pretty cool. Did it seem daunting when you're talking about doing this for the first time? Like, is that a scary proposition to think about? And then you were surprised by how straightforward it actually was?
Yeah, definitely. I was worried because I looked at the code in other gems before and I didn't really understand sometimes how they work because it seemed like very low level. And I'm usually working business logic, app level type stuff. And yeah, with a little help of some Chat GPT and using the generators, then I was up and running in no time. And just to tack on, a lot of the time I was quiet when you guys were talking about other frameworks, and I don't have any experience with any of the other frameworks, Elixir or Laravel or Node. So I don't have a lot to compare. to Rails. But I will just testify that when I started learning Rails, it just gave me this feeling of empowerment, like I could do anything. And I still have that feeling today. And I run 2 businesses, and I spend a lot of time at the business level and only probably 30 or 40% of my time coding. And because of Rails, I can run 2 businesses, 2 SaaS products without having to spend 100% of my time doing this. I always thought that's pretty amazing that you can build substantial businesses off of a software framework and not have this team of people behind the scenes that's keeping it all afloat.
That was the big thing when React and stuff got adopted. Now you need a front end team and a back end team, and they got to coordinate. You got microservices, you got to coordinate the deployments and make sure all the versions are in sync and everything. And that is a can of worms you don't realize you're opening, and then you can't put it back in once it's escaped. That is the thing that if you follow indie hackers, you probably know Peter Levels. Dude makes millions a year, and it's pretty much just him and one server and some PHP. Everybody is like, I want to be like him. You can do an insane amount. It doesn't have to be with Rails. I think with Rails, the big thing is you get Ruby, and Rails did such a good job building this DSL around MVC and building frameworks and stuff. And they spend a stupid amount of time on getting naming perfect. Active support, I really just wish all that stuff was built into Ruby half the time, because there's so many moments when I was learning, I would just guess that something existed, and I would write the code and run it and just have never checked the docs or anything, and it would work. And I was like blown away that, well, 5.minutes ago just works. And all I had learned that 5.minutes existed or something. And how crazy is this? And it reads like English. I've had clients who don't really know how to code, and I'm building an app for them. They just start in GitHub and go, I went and changed this format on whatever in the views. That's because it's that readable. It's wild. That's our superpower. Probably the hardest part if you want to go build a library is spending that amount of time figuring out the naming and getting that right, and the database structure and everything else. That can be pretty tough. That is where pay was really tough and broke down pretty quickly. You want to use Stripe checkout? Well, no one else supports checkout the same way, or they don't call it the same thing or whatever. So we have one-off methods for different payment processors, and trying to abstract that stuff, probably not a good idea. Looking at what Laravel did, each cashier version for Lemon Squeezy and Stripe and everything, totally separate. So they'll have features for one. They don't expect you to use 2. Pay probably will go that way eventually. The reason I did it in the first place was for GoRails. We used Stripe, but we needed PayPal in the early days because they only accepted credit cards. So we had Braintree just for PayPal. Then they eventually get acquired by PayPal. And then Stripe in Europe has PayPal support, but then Stripe added all these other local payment methods. People don't really ask for PayPal anymore. And the horror stories of using PayPal as a business owner or whatever, I don't want to accept PayPal or have money living in there for as little as possible. And so it's cool now to see that. But then we also have these customers that until their subscriptions expire, we still have to support that Braintree code for however many years, maybe forever, if people just keep staying subscribed. And that also becomes a tough point of, as a library maintainer, where do you accepted something and you need to remove it? It can be pretty painful for people who are dependent on it and whatnot. I guess we can take the sacrifice and keep maintaining it, or something, extract it and sort of abandon it, but could live independently, that people could continue maintaining and try to onboard some of those people to be maintainers of it or something. That's another thing that's tough, is the libraries may be really great for 3 years and well maintained until that person leaves the job that they extracted the library from. And then even Devise got abandoned for quite a long time, and it eventually got turbo and hot wire support and whatever, but it required a lot of work to make that happen. And it wasn't anybody's day job priority thing. So that was also tough too, but at least it's there now. But yeah,
I think
these are all the fun things of open source, huh?
Another model there, even related to pay, let's say if you had to sort of terminate support for Braintree and stuff like that, the Rails LTS model for people that were stuck on old versions of Rails, there was that service, Rails LTS.
Yeah.
You could pay a certain amount of months and they just manage and maintain the old versions of Rails. So you can stay on that old version and you just get security updates or things like that. There's a way to compensate then. And I don't know if that makes sense in this scenario, but if you had enough people that were willing to pay, it has to be some way of compensating people.
Yeah.
And that's just one other way that could potentially work when a library needs to not be maintained in someone's spare time anymore.
Yeah, I like that a lot as an option. And hopefully there's an easy way of offering that type of thing, having a private repo or something with your paid version that's maintained for the long term. Also, you reminded me of Rails LTS. That was a big thing a few years ago, but Rails has kind of gotten so easy to upgrade over the more recent versions that I forgot all about that.
Back in the 3, 4, 5, that era, I think a lot of apps got stuck there. I brought it up with a client a year and a half ago, I think. I said, we can do the upgrade. Here's roughly what I think it's going to cost. It was one of those scenarios where Heroku Stack's upgrading, and that means you need to upgrade Ruby, which means you need to upgrade Rails, which means you got a lot of work to do. And so here's what it's going to cost if we do the upgrade, and it buys you this much time on the next version of Rails for the Heroku Stack, 20 or whatever. Or you can pay in perpetuity, you could do a Rails LTS license. So you're going to pay this much a month and you have Rails LTS and we'll stay where we are. And I guess that would mean migrating off of Heroku or something like that. But yeah, so I think it's viable. If you're in that spot in a business or with an app where you can't continue to sink more development time into it, there are legitimate reasons why people have to stay where they are. But there are also then business opportunities, I think, around that, either sell product or service to make that happen.
I want to see, and I think this goes a little bit to the, how do we get more of the Laravel experience here? Like, instead of having Laravel as the people you pay, it should be you pay for Sidekick and you pay Mike Perham and Evil Martians and Go Rails and whatever else. A whole bunch of other indie hackers, more or less, that are supporting the community. And they get the opportunity to have their own business, live their own life and whatever. And we can support each other that way. And there's probably a ton of them that are just not obvious like that of, we're deprecating this library or a feature of it, but either the maintainer themselves or they have someone they trust that wants to take that up, or maybe it's their biggest users. Well, actually, on the side, we use this at work and my business needs this, but I could just maintain a long-term support version of it. And there's your opportunity. And you can have a little side business. And heck, even if it only makes $1,000 a month, that can go a long ways to paying rent or whatever else. So that alone can be a little life-changing thing. And it might just be kind of selling your own sawdust kind of thing where you didn't realize that you're doing this work that you could have just made some money on the side for. And then that makes it easier for you to do because maybe you're going to do it for free anyways or whatever. But they can be a little hard. I've found it's hard to tell what you can do, but I think people should do more of the videos like you're doing. I've always wanted to do those. Do you do any editing on those?
I'm using Riverside because they added video ability. Does the AI transcription and it automatically cuts out all the pauses. And then I can just read through the transcript, delete words where I said something weird. So I spend a little bit of time there, but that's what I'm doing, and then export. And so it ends up being way easier than recording all locally and figuring that out in iMovie or a ScreenFlow or something like that.
Yeah, I've wanted to do that for a long time, but I was going to have a camera and then a microphone and then import that footage to the computer and then edit that. It was just clearly too much work, but I think people should be doing more of that especially if you're like, hey, I maintain this gem, but it's getting to the point where I can't do it anymore. Most of the time, people just disappear and go silent. But if we were like sharing more of those updates and struggles and decisions along the way and whatever else, it would make the community a lot more cohesive too.
Yeah.
To like help and support each other, because we may not even know that you need support or help or whatever.
Right. You go to a gem on GitHub and see maintainers wanted, but that's all you see. You don't hear from the person and like the reasons why that library might be in that state, or how many people it's impacting, who might benefit or be hindered by this not being maintained. You know, like all those factors, like you don't really have the big picture unless you are like all in the weeds on all of that stuff. You know, all the gritty details, you know, because you've been following it for a long time.
And as the person looking for a new maintainer, you get a whole bunch of posts that are like, I'll do it. And it's, yeah, but you submitted these weird pull requests in the past that were for some strange feature you're trying to do that isn't the direction I want the library to go.
Sure.
So even those people like submitting and saying, hey, I'd love to maintain this. It's so hard for the maintainers to even find somebody they can trust to be a proper patron of it going forward or whatever.
Yeah.
So that would help a lot too. Hey, we use this at my job, blah, blah, blah. Here's what I would do if I was going to maintain this or whatever. That kind of stuff would help a lot as well. Instead of just I need this, so I'll do it for you.
Yeah.
Just transfer the ownership to me.
Yeah.
That's how we get the Linux XZ issues and security problems too.
And that's always scary to me. Like, I don't know about you guys, but when I am watching gem updates, Dependapot updates, and if I see a maintainer has changed, I go and look a lot more closely at the updates. It may be totally legit, but I'm always checking like, okay, this is a new person that cut the release. I'm looking a little bit closer. Just because I know that's a point of potential risk, right? I want to understand how something changed hands and why this new person's maintaining and what impact they're making, because it is a potential change to the way that gem has been managed after that point. A restaurant that comes under new management, it's not the same experience. It can't be. It's going to be different somehow.
Well, we've been rolling for a while. I think we're probably at time here.
We're
We're
almost at Jose numbers.
Any other things you guys want to touch on before we wrap up?
A few quick thoughts from me. One is, I think that we should send a Rails delegation to Laracon next year to see. Yeah, all right.
Do we have to wear fake mustaches and stuff?
I thought we could just make some pins. We could just be ambassadors.
Bring some Rails World swag.
That's right. I want to learn more.
Drinking his Laravel mug.
Yeah. What you can't see is Jason's really cool Laravel mug. Yeah. I think that would be really cool because I think there is a lot we could still learn. And it's not like we go back and say, this is what we have to have. This is what Rails needs to give us. It's more like, how could we have this in some other fashion? Is there an opportunity for some new businesses that would spring up to build some missing things? Are there some new projects that we could start that would make things better for newcomers? There are a lot of ways to skin the cat. You don't have to just ask the Rails core team to build more stuff. There's a bunch of other ways to do it. So that's one thing. Go to Laracon, learn what they're doing, kind of bring it back. Second is, I think personally, Chris, you would ask what I'm learning from Liminal that I wish I had a better answer for. Part of it is the Hotwire stuff. There's a ton of great content out there related to Turbo, but there are some ways, some things that have had to do with Turbo streams in particular that I wish there was either more convention around or where I had more confidence that I had seen a number of people implementing things in a certain way that I was confident the direction I was going.
I posted a tweet yesterday about a question on morphing and scroll preserve. And it was really surprising to me, the answer that came out of it. But it showed me that a lot of people expect one thing, but it's really behaving another.
That's part of the tension, I think, between Hotwire not being, it's not Rails. It is not part of Rails, but it's also still somewhat new. And we haven't seen a bunch of big players use it, sort of hammer on it enough that we're like, okay, this is the way you do it. That's partly how I feel there. So
yeah,
it's that. And
I'm with you on that.
Yeah. I want to do some more writing about that. I think I have some things to say, but I'm only one person and I still don't know, like what I don't know, where does this go when the scale grows?
Yeah. And there's so many, like, probably the best examples of how to use it are watching the source code in your browser of Basecamp and Hey and seeing how it was designed and intended to solve the problems they're using it for. And then it's most likely very similar to Action Text and Active Storage. And they used it for their needs, designed it for those problems. And then you are using it in unexpected ways that maybe don't even have a good solution yet. And then how do you get the conversation going of how can we improve the library itself, Hotwire itself, to make that easier? Because yeah, like morphing, cool. But also this introduces a whole bunch of edge cases now that we weren't expecting. We just thought it was going to be magic because that's kind of how it was presented as magic. And yet it's not actually magic. And we don't really know what to do with it to take advantage of it with these other things that maybe they didn't need.
The other piece there that I wish I had a better answer for was an unstyled component library using Vue component, either Vue or Flex. I'm a firm believer that component library, we ought to have a Vue component library for Rails that is sort of standard, but having it be unstyled because I want to do my own styling. I don't want to buy a UI kit. I just want to be
like a headless UI.
Yeah.
Like Tailwind basically built for them to ship Tailwind UI, and as they built these React and Vue components that aren't styled, but they have all the accessibility, everything.
Exactly. Yeah. There's core like HTML elements and things that we have. Oh, now we have the ability to do dialogues with HTML. And then there's the highly complex components that you might build very specific to some use case. But then there's the stuff in the middle, like combo boxes and things that most people have to solve, or tooltips or whatever. Like most people are going to need those things. And I just want the de facto, if it's not the official, it's the most popular unofficial version of that that's unstyled. So I can do the styling on it.
Yeah. Did you watch Caleb Porzio at Laracon announce Flux?
Yeah.
The thing that caught my eye the most about that was he was taking care of all the accessibility, the keyboard shortcuts, all of those things. I don't really care how it's styled. If it has default styles, cool. But at the end of the day, the styling is not the hard part. The hard part is getting the ARIA attributes right, getting the like Z indexes and all these little accessibility things correct. That good luck. He spent 9 months so far working on that and still not done. So that's just your standard set of components. And I would love that. I DM'd Caleb right away. When are we getting this for Rails? And if you need help, let me know. Because I have the same need. And it seems like most of the component approaches people are taking are primarily trying to make it well designed, which is fine, but also like isn't going to fit with the design that I need that's unique to my apps. And every app of mine is different and yada, yada. And we don't want them to all look like Bootstrap. That was a big problem when Bootstrap came out.
I think it's a little bit of a problem with Tailwind too. Like everyone just taking off Tailwind UI. I think it's great in one way because you can build things fast, but then it makes everything look so homogeneous.
Tailwind UI sucks for Rails developers, specifically because when they shipped with the Alpine version. But as soon as you see that requires JS badge next to the Rails developer not using React or Vue, it's okay, well, there goes that. And to the point where, like, we talked a little bit about this on IndieRails, I think, to the point where, like, I'm just ready to use React and inertia and just move on with my life.
Yeah.
Rails is so good. And I lose most of my time in the UI resolving problems that not just one person, but hundreds, thousands of people have solved in React already. And to your point about the headless Vue component thing, I was actually thinking about that while you're talking. And it goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about Laravel and kind of versus Rails. Chris was talking about Caleb spent 9 months building Flux just for all the accessibility, things like that. Tailwind has paid people to work on open source, building headless UI and perfecting it. It just takes these businesses that can afford to do it.
I can't afford to spend 9 months like to build something like that. Yeah.
Chris spends an ungodly amount of time on open source. Chris couldn't do that and balance Go Rails and Hatchbox and his other open source work. And so I think it is going to take either someone doing a Kickstarter and being like, I'm about to dedicate a year of my life to this. Will you fund my salary? Or it's going to take a company who has a vested interest like Tailwind.
If we just built all that stuff into the browser so it was easier.
Yeah.
If we
I've heard of the browser before.
It's wild how much work goes into building a modal that doesn't use the dialogue thing in the browser. You freeze the page so you can't scroll, but then the scroll bar disappears. And scroll bar is different width on Mac OS and Windows and Linux, and each browser is different. And you end up with a ridiculous amount of problems to solve, which is amazing. They can do that in the browser for us, but they're a better location to solve these problems. And ideally that becomes, why do we not have a drop-down menu thing yet that's in the browser? And we're getting that with hopover attributes and stuff. But we, in the meantime, have to wait until that, even things like tabs or whatever, probably aren't going to ship in the browser for who knows when, maybe never, I don't know. But we'll always have these components we're going to need, and we definitely need some of them today more than others. I love the pitch of the no-build JavaScript and everything, but import maps don't work with CSS. So how do we get CSS if we import from a CDN and yada, yada? Sadly, we're still in like very early days of this, and it's way better than it used to be, but also it's still not there. And it's one of those things that holds us back from being the one-person framework. Every framework, web framework, is still struggling with this stuff too. It's not just Rails, but like Jason said, when I get into the UI and trying to make that polished and then work nicely with Rails and then rendering errors and all that stuff, it can be like very, very time consuming, because you can go build your models, design your database architecture, and then that'll be solid and set for a long time. And then you just catch yourself spending a lot of time making sure I got my turbo streams right, or my turbo frames with the right IDs matched everywhere. And that's not even to mention all the form components and whatnot. So it definitely still feels like, well, that's probably the thing. As Rails is primarily the back end has been polished for 20 years or whatever. But the front end is the stuff that's always changing. The browsers get new features. Mobile phones come out. They're all different too. And that's the stuff Rails can't control. That's probably why it's so much harder and less polished. But still, you wish that after 20 years, it would be real quick to like get an idea from a PSD or Figma design right into the browser and functional, but yet still is fairly time consuming.
It's manageable for people that have been around a long time like us, but I feel most concerned for newcomers.
Yeah.
I want a story that's really compelling for them and makes it easier for them. So
they don't know that these are things that are a problem because they're just excited to learn new stuff. Watching them, and you're like, God, I wish you didn't have to deal with this or that or whatever, because they're just cool. Let's dig in and learn whatever. And that is what makes it feel so daunting to get started as a developer, because you're like, oh God, I got to learn. You do a pretty good job of abstracting HTTP. There are still times where you got to write fresh when and learn what the hell an E tag is and whatever else, that you have to like get into the deeper stuff. If you're writing front end stuff, unless you're using React, you have no abstractions. You got what the browser gives you, and it still feels pretty low level to do a lot of that. Yep. Any other bullet points you had?
Front end sucks.
Front end sucks, yeah. I think we need more things like the Rails Hackathon and Rails SaaS.
Real quick on the hackathon. So I wasn't going to do it this year because I've been so busy, but Marco was nudging me, and we're going to do one the weekend of Friday, October 25th through the 27th. We haven't really announced it yet. And I need to make sure I tweet about it and stuff so that people actually show up, because it might just be Marco that weekend. But that is fun. It's one where like the trouble in it probably similar to organizing a conference. The more stuff you want to do, the can of worms you continue opening. Yeah. Last year, we had some swag to give out and sent stuff overseas. And then a month later, it shows back up at my doorstep. And I was like, I put in the address exactly right as far as I know. And it costs $60 to send this box over. And I'm like, I can't just keep sending them back. It was tough. As an organizer, I just needed to be like, let's just hack this weekend. No prizes, especially too, if it's cash prizes, people start abusing things and they're working on the project way ahead and whatever. And I don't want to get into any of that. I just want to have fun coding this weekend. And so we're going to just keep it as simple as possible, I think, and keep doing that. But last week of October, weekend is when we're going to do it this year.
Cool. I'm glad you're doing it. No pressure on that, but I do think it's important. It's the kind of thing that gets people excited about doing things, building things by themselves in Rails. So I really like that. And I really wish a Rails SaaS would come back. And we had the conference in LA and then there was in Greece as well. I don't know if Andrew will ever bring it back, but I feel like we need another conference like that.
I love that because it's, I think, a big reason why we also love Rails and Laravel. They're web frameworks, but they're not just web frameworks. They're ones around building products and businesses and stuff. And that's the other half of the reason why we stick with it. It's not just about coding for coding's sake and building things that are fast, which are always hilariously, DHH will tweet something about whatever requests per seconds you can get on whatever Hetzner server. And everybody's like, that's slow as hell. And yeah, but you could build this without spending 6 months on performance. That's the trade-off we make. We can throw a few more dollars at a server that really isn't going to affect much at all. And also, who cares about what we build if no one's using it? So performance does not matter until it matters when you're making money. So I think that's another foundational philosophy that we have and kind of share with Laravel that Rails SaaS as a conference really emphasizes. And I think we need more of that. It's not a common thing we have at conferences. They're all technical. As a developer working in a company, talks about your career and whatever else, but less business stuff. And I'd love to see more of that.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
Well, gentlemen, we can go for another hour, but I think Jason's going to cut us off here.
Yeah, I've already gotten pulled back into work for the last 20 minutes of the conversation. So.
As you drink out of your Laravel mug.
I remind the team that rewriting in Laravel is still an option every day.
Definitely.
Who cares about all the code we've written the last 10 years when we could rewrite it in PHP?
Everyone needs a fresh start.
Thank you. Thank you. You get it. Well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys. This has been great.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It was a lot of fun.
If we cross-post this, then you will know where to find the podcast you're listening to.
Because you're already listening to it.
Exactly. If you don't listen to Remote Ruby, I understand for obvious reasons. And if you want to listen to it, it's remoteruby.com. Chris is on X. I'm on X. And for those
I'm on Twitter.
There it is. There it is. For those listening to Remote Ruby who want to listen to IndieRails or maybe follow y'all, where can they find you?
On this podcast.
IndieRails.com, on X, IndieRails.
What about Twitter?
Also on Twitter.
Same handle on Twitter, IndieRails.
Yeah. Awesome. This is fun. Let's do it again soon. And are y'all going to Rails World this year?
We are.
I squeezed in there at the last minute.
Nice.
All right.
I just bought awesome ticket yesterday.
It'll be cool.
Sweet.
Happy to be coming.
You can watch us go over our time slot, the recording booth in person this year.
Yeah.
So.
I'll be up against the glass.
You guys this year.
That's right. Yeah. We're going to lock you out of your time slot.
Please do. Good Lord.
I wonder if we'll be in the sauna again.
If there's not one, I'm just going to print out a sheet so people can fill out the time slots this year. So.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
All right. Well, this was good, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah. See you in a couple weeks.